I think that's what the people of Elkhart and people around America are looking for, and that's the kind of leadership I'm going to try to provide. All right? Thank you, guys.
I thought the most interesting answer he had was to the last question. The woman from National Public Radio got up. She's also a Fox News contributor, so be careful. Basically, Fox News getting two questions there through her and Jason Garrett. And she said, what did you learn about, trying to approach this from a bipartisan perspective? And he said, maybe the lesson I learned is that if I want tax cuts, I shouldn't say I want tax cuts. I should let the Republicans come in here and demand tax cuts, and then I'll say, all right, you win. I'll be bipartisan. I'll give you tax cuts. But you know what? You should do that. That's good, smart politics. And what did he say towards the end of that question? He said, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, and that I thought we could do this in a way where everybody had, legitimate points that they thought actually helped the American people. But you see, you were wrong about that optimism. And I think he's beginning to get a sense that he was wrong about it. But earlier he had pointed out in an answer something very important, which is, look, we might not have gotten a bipartisan solution here in the short term, but I'm not just looking for the short term. I want this bipartisanship thing to work over the long term, and I think we're going to get there. And you know what? That made me an optimist to some degree. I thought that was a very thoughtful answer and made me think, you know what? Maybe he's going to wear these guys down. Whether it's through the politics and maybe it's through the carrots and sticks, etc., but he's going to really give it a shot for as long as he can, it appears. And at the end of 4 years, will he have changed the way Washington works in that sense? Well, that would be a minor miracle. That would be more impressive than any specific bill or issue he's going to tackle, whether it's the stimulus package, the bailout, whether it's energy, health care, defense, whatever it might be. That would be the most impressive thing of all. If at the end of the 4 years he actually got just some Republicans, not to play politics, but to actually put together proposals they believe in. Not the Democrats believe in, not to get them to agree with the Democrats, but to put together proposals that are constructive and principled rather than saying, okay, this is what we're going to do to sabotage the Democrats. And that I will not believe until I see it. And I certainly will not expect it. I certainly will not act based on that expectation, which is what Obama did here in his first time out. And I think he did learn that lesson, as he said in that last answer, to some degree, and that he will change his expectation to some degree, but with keeping in mind that your ultimate goal is, look, don't give up on it, really try to bring these people in. If they don't come in, then give them the stick, as he did today. And he went to some talking points over and over where he beat up the Republicans today, which I liked, where he said, look, these are failed policies. Now, he said that on a number of occasions. And part of his original speech that I loved is when he said, look, we gave tax cuts to the wealthiest people for 8 straight years. And that's what got us into this mess in the first place. He needs to say that a lot more, because tax cuts have gotten a free ride for the last 30 years in America. All they've done is portray them as positive, positive, positive. No one has ever said, hey, you know what? Tax cuts don't work. And they need to be said because, not always, but on occasion, they do not work. And so here is Obama beginning to make that point, which is very important. And he has a lot of political clout now in order to be able to convince Americans of that. And he said it in a smart way in the speech. I love this speech, by the way. Now, the question and answer is slightly different. I'll get to that in a second. But in the speech, he said, look, do I think the private industry is going to create jobs? Of course I do. It should have created jobs, of course. But how do we get there? Right now, what we need is a little bit of government help to stimulate the economy to get to the point where private industry creates jobs. And that was the kind of balance he had throughout this hour here, where he talked about, look, let's go through step 1, step 2, step 3. Now, I always kept joking around saying, step 1, punch him in the mouth. And that is definitely not Obama's step 1. Step 1 he does is usually reach out and say, hey, look, here's my honest and earnest proposal. Now, I think, like I said a little while ago, he's got to sharpen up on that a little bit politically, so he could seem like he's conceding more to the Republicans later, seem even more bipartisan, and bring them in better and get better packages. That's part of healthy, normal negotiations. But he said, look, we got to take this one step at a time, And Chuck Todd asked him a good question about consumer spending. He said consumer spending was part of the problem. Why do you think we need to stimulate us? And why do you think it's part of the solution? Great question I would have asked him. And he said, look, I'm not looking to say that consumer spending is the end-all, be-all. But step one is stabilize the economy. And then step two is, once we have stabilized it, let's talk about how we can have more saving rather than just spending. And that's a great answer. I didn't know what his answer would be. And I'm not sure I knew what the answer was. But I liked Obama's answer. It was very effective. And two, you know how Bush in the press conferences would have a combative air to him most of the time, and then he'd do what he thought was a clever point, oh yeah, yeah, and then he'd do the smirk. Dave pointed this out in the live chat when he thought he was so smart. He didn't get any of that here. There's no silliness, no, smirks, etc. But also, there was no combativeness. He acknowledged each question like, hey, you know what, that's a solid and fair and legitimate question, and here's my answer. It was respectful, it was smart. It was so smart that at times it was boring. I looked at that press conference and I thought, okay, God, and you're right, that's a good point, it's a reasonable point, you deliver your talking point well. Especially on the first question, I was like, I love you, but go on to the second question, okay? The Bush press conferences were disastrous, but they were entertaining. Because he was always going to say something stupid, he was always going to say something silly, and then look proud. Did I get you on that one? Big stretch. No, this is a professional press conference, and this is how a president handles it. One quick note on who asked the questions. Notice he asked Sam Stein of Huffington Post to ask a question. Look, let's get real here. Let me tell you how it works behind the scenes. That confers great legitimacy on Huffington Post. And Huffington Post, let's keep it real here, is largely progressive. And that is a smart way of building a progressive brand that's eventually going to help his side more often than not, right? They're not in the business of helping Obama, but they're in the business of pushing ideas, if you ask me, that are more in line with Obama's because they're progressive. In fact, oftentimes they'll push Obama from the other side in the editorials. I know because I write editorials there, as well as Ariana Huffington just challenged them from the left last week, and we had her on the show to talk about it. But that's smart of him to have Sam ask that question, and Sam asked a great question on Patrick Leahy. In fact, that was the thing we were talking about right before the press conference started. Hey, what are you going to do? Are you going to prosecute these guys? Now, unfortunately, I hated Obama's answer on that one. He said, look, no one is above the law, which is a nice standard thing everybody says. If he meant it, I would love it. But then he went on to say twice, we look forward, we don't look backward. That is a way of saying, no, I'm not going to go after any of the Bush guys. I'm going to let them get away with it, and then I'm going to say, hey, here's what we should do going forward. But if you don't punish anybody for what they did in the past, then the next guy who comes in is going to have no incentive to follow the law because he's going to think, oh, look forward, don't worry. Everybody gets a get-out-of-jail-free card if you're the president and you break the law. So I didn't like his answer on that one.